Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everyone, to this month's session. And in particular, thank you very much, Lucy, for running this session for us. So this is the sort of the monthly QRCA show and tell, for want of a better word, or sort of knowledge share. And Lucy Foylan will be leading this for us today and talking about a hybrid future, where we'll be exploring human interaction on and offline. Excited to see this. I've not seen this presentation before, and I'm really looking forward to it. After the session, we've got this more as a Zoom setup rather than the usual webinar, so we can chat easily, and depending on how many people join, we'll either just chat as a group or as in some spin-off rooms. So without further ado, Lucy, if you're ready to rumble,
Great.
looking forward to hearing the presentation.
Great, thank you, Dave. Okay, great. So let's get started. So in our fast-paced and hybrid world, it can actually be really easy to forget how quickly online communication has grown to take on the role that it now plays in our lives. So when we think back to the 2020 lockdown, there was a huge acceleration in our use of online channels to facilitate communication. And now jumping on a Zoom call for a debrief or pitching to a new client on Google Meet feels like completely the norm. And in fact, I feel, I don't know if you guys do, that you kind of have to justify the cost of doing business in person rather than it being online. But I'll be honest with you, pre-pandemic, Qual at the nursery where I work was firmly rooted in face-to-face. We didn't really rate online methods. We were a bit suspicious of them. We felt like it was difficult to read people and the energy around a topic or an idea online. And we also felt that people weren't really used to communicating in an authentic way online. So we were worried about the kind of results we'd get from connecting with people in that way. But of course, when the pandemic hit, like many, we had to do a quick 180 on that and kind of pivot to 100% online methods. And in part, this was made easier by the fact that our participants were in the same boat. So they had also had to quickly upskill. I mean, not just research participants, but everyone really, wasn't it? They had to quickly upskill, and when it came to communicating online and become increasingly familiar with this as a way of doing things. But nevertheless, we still had concerns about our ability to read people and understand energy around a topic or an idea online. And so we became increasingly interested in looking into this more and understanding more about how we as humans communicate on and offline and the consequences for qualitative research specifically. So how does the nature of a shared environment impact the way we present ourselves to others? And how does it impact how we see ourselves, both as individuals, but also as part of a group? So we decided to run a little experiment. Firstly, we spoke to friends and contacts across sectors such as healthcare, educational settings like universities and schools, as well as people in a more corporate environment in order to develop some hypotheses around online and offline behavior. We explored the concept of the communication environment, how group dynamics can fluctuate, and how power dynamics shift. And it became clear very quickly that it's not as simple as face-to-face is good and online is bad. So we designed our own experiment to explore and test these hypotheses further. So that's what this session is about, really. It's about going through the psychological theory that formed the foundation of our experiment, sharing findings and examples, and at the end of the session, some recommendations for how you can apply this to your own practice as researchers. As Dave said, it would be great to hear from everyone as well, like how they've been applying different techniques to online and offline since the pandemic, including the strengths and weaknesses of online and offline approaches and how to make the best of both in this hybrid world. So as an agency, we feel like really building and cultivating a strong understanding of this has helped us to maximize both online and offline methods in recent years. So first, let's look at a bit more of the background in terms of our methodology and approach and the hypotheses we wanted to explore. So here's the methodological approach of our experiment. We ran 2 face-to-face groups, 2 groups on Zoom, and 2 text-only chats, kind of like an old MSN discussion. And in order to explore behavior and human interactions, we needed to pick a topic for them to discuss in the groups, of course, something everyone had experience in, likely to hold strong opinions on, So we decided to pick how they feel about following the rules, how they feel about following guidelines in society and the law, with a specific focus on that pandemic lockdown, as that was when we were conducting the experiment. So then, considering theory in the field, we chose some different areas to explore in our experiment, which have a robust history of evidence and felt particularly applicable and relevant to us as researchers. And so today we're going to look at a couple of those: self-disclosure and identity and shared space. So self-disclosure is about the extent to which people are willing to share information about themselves and personal details. And we wanted to understand how this might vary across those three different conditions. And secondly, we wanted to explore the way identity is affected by the nature of shared space in each communication environment, and how this shaped the behavior of participants. So firstly, let's take a look at self-disclosure. So within the world of psychological theory, there is evidence to suggest that people are more likely to disclose personal details online than they are face-to-face. Not only this, but there's also evidence to show that people are more willing to reveal aspects of themselves that might be less socially acceptable online than they would face-to-face. And finally, there's evidence that people reveal themselves more quickly online, and more about themselves more quickly and more earlier in the relationship than they would in a face-to-face setting. So in other words, if we put this as a practical example, when we meet a stranger for the first time face-to-face, we tend to keep ourselves to ourselves, we tend to be quite guarded, and it may take a few meetings before we start to really open up and share. But on the internet, people tend to start sharing that personal information much more earlier. So with this in mind, and from a research point of view, is it possible that online participants reveal more about their true feelings and more quickly on a topic than they would in a face-to-face setting? Well, let's see what happened in our experiment. In a face-to-face group, everyone is sharing that physical space. So initially, they have the opportunity to observe each other's body language, expression, and tone of voice in a really natural and accessible way. The shared space really facilitates more tentative engagement because people can speak easily, observe how their comments are received, and this leads to more of a back and forth. Participants can state opinions, try to persuade each other, look for compromises, agree and demur as necessary. Meanwhile, on Zoom platform, for example, so a video platform, it's actually a lot harder to observe body language and expression. And on top of this, people are very safe and secure in their own home setting. You can just turn the computer off and walk away effectively. This, we found, led them more to state opinion, but as the conversation develops, they tend to just reinforce their position. They'll politely acknowledge that others have spoken, but they don't become overly invested in compromising or building an understanding of another participant's point of view. And individuals online seem a lot more comfortable with just kind of throwing information out there, and they don't have as much of an investment in how the group receives that information and what the response will be. And finally, on the chat, we saw a much more volatile and fluctuating discussion flow. So participants had no option but to state their opinion in quite a bold way. They're on the chat function, it's kind of devoid of nuance or tone of voice. They had the opportunity to reflect on the other things, the other kind of statements that other people had shared, but we found that then they kind of really went to extremes. So they either doubled down quite aggressively on what they said sometimes, or they capitulated completely to someone else's point of view, or they disengaged altogether. It was a lot more difficult to tell if they were even still there, because the semi-anonymity of the group meant that there wasn't really anyone to hold them accountable for what they did or didn't do or didn't say. So how did we see this reflected when we ran our experiment? Well, we asked participants, what happens at home when it comes to meal prep? And more importantly, have your drinking habits changed since the lockdown in terms of how much alcohol you're consuming? In the face-to-face setting, we have this example of Alex. He's making a point about meal prep during lockdown. It's an area in which his partner takes the lead. So he says, I'd have to say it's 100% my wife, and everyone laughed. I just turn up. I'm not saying what's for dinner, but I'll accept anything that comes out. And everyone's laughing. Oh, on a silver plate. Well, that kind of sounds chauvinistic, doesn't it? I don't mean it that way. I really don't. Oh, you can't cook, can you? They're going to share this with your wife. Everyone's laughing. And they serve beans on toast and everyone laughs. So we can see here that Alex how much Alex is willing to disclose about himself is really shaped by the response of those in that physical shared environment around him. The other participants are clearly joking around, and that shapes the way he explores the topic and his reaction. He closes with this kind of self-effacing comment about beans on toast, and it did take him a little bit of time to recover from this. It took some coaxing from the moderator to share again with the group. And in contrast, on Zoom, we saw quite a different situation. So here we can see Louise putting forward quite a light-hearted comment. I think my alcohol intake went up about 75% in the first few weeks of the lockdown. That's probably how I ended up knocked up. And then it went down to 0. And although we can see here some kind of wry smiles, the other participants didn't really react, and the joke landed quite awkwardly. It was quite a cringy moment, a bit of kind of like tumbleweeds. The comment didn't really help the group bond in the way it might have done face-to-face. But the really important thing to note here is Louise herself did not seem too fazed at all by the incident. She just carried on contributing to the group as normal. And it did make us wonder, would she have disclosed this about herself so quickly, one, if she'd been in a face-to-face setting, but two, would she have been able to bounce back so quickly and just kind of breeze past it if the other participants' reaction had been kind of meh in a face-to-face setting? So let's look at our second theme, which is identity and shared space. So theory in the area of identity and shared space suggests that differences in behavior and the ways in which we communicate with each other can partly be explained by which type of identity is kind of front of mind or salient during any given interaction. And we can look at identity in two ways in that sense. So personal identity and then social identity. And personal identity is our own sense of self, the things we feel make us individual, perhaps even that make us different from those around us. Meanwhile, you can kind of hold several different social identities at a time, and they're kind of linked to the groups we feel we belong to. So like a Liverpool fan, a nursery employee, a climber, and social identities, in contrast, rely on what makes us the same as each other within a group. So psychological experiments have shown that if a social identity is more salient during an interaction, it leads to more pronounced group effects. But if personal identity is salient, the effects of the group are reduced. So how did this reflect in our own experiment? Well, in a face-to-face setting, sharing that physical space strongly increased the desire to behave as a group and to discuss topics iteratively. Each individual was very obviously conscious of the group dynamic. They showed an idea to be understood and be appreciated by the group because their group identity was salient here. Meanwhile, on Zoom, participants established a more individualistic identity. They seemed less interested in forming a bond as a group. They were keen to voice their personal opinion, of course, but rather than this contributing to a consensus, it was more about reinforcing their identity as an individual because their personal identity was salient in this situation. And then finally on chat, again, we saw this sense that there was a lot more volatility. So their sense of identity was blurred due to the semi-anonymity of the participants. We could only see their first names or what they chose to kind of share on screen. And so we saw a much more fluctuating sense of shared space where participants were able to kind of just check out, dip back in. And so it felt like their personal identity was salient, but there was these sudden bursts of kind of unpredictable group identity salience where everybody suddenly piled on an idea. So let's see some examples from the research. So as part of the sessions, we did a sort of thought experiment where we asked the participants to play the role of a jury, and they had to decide what to do if they caught someone not wearing a mask in a supermarket, which at the time was something that was illegal, but obviously highly contested. So what did we find? Well, in the shared face-to-face setting, the group spent a long time discussing a fair response to this misdemeanor. So here we can see Paul, I'd fine them so they know not to do it again, just like when you get a speeding fine. And the response, I was going to say, have you been done for speeding before? Yeah, you pay a fine or you do an awareness course. Maybe give them an awareness course, and if they do it again, then they get a fine. So one of the participants obviously feels that they deserve a fine. Other participants feel this is too harsh. So they settle on this awareness course with a warning and a fine to follow if there is a second offence. So this sharing of the physical environment meant that the group was really invested in finding a solution that everyone in the group is happy with. The group identity is salient. They want to find similarities between themselves and look for consensus. In comparison, on chat, group and personal identity salience is more volatile, it's constantly changing. So here we see this person who's just titled AU. Some people can't wear them due to medical conditions, but if I'm totally honest, it does annoy me a bit when I see people not wearing them. Just a human reaction, but then I catch myself on, nope. How does a piece of fabric stop you getting a virus? The virus kills less than 1% of people. It is not a killer. If anyone is concerned about the virus, then it is their option to wear a mask. I think they're pointless. So we can see that when the rest of the group realise they have that strong shared social identity of kind of being anti-mask, their response becomes more emotional, more raw, they're using cap locks, it's much more extreme. And at the same time, the person who originally spoke, AU, they're able to kind of duck out of the conversation altogether. We don't know how affected they were by this dominant group identity. They certainly didn't comment again on it. They may just have walked away. So these are the different areas that we have explored. And together we can start to see that quite different behavioural traits are emerging in each of the three channels. We've summarised them here. The face-to-face group were very much about being part of a group. Their group identity was salient and they were tentative about self-disclosure. The Zoom group was very different, almost the opposite. They were much more rooted in their individual identity and therefore much less interested in the group. Their individual identity was salient and they were more willing to disclose about themselves. And then finally, in terms of the chat-only group, we see a much more blurred sense of identity as participants couldn't see each other. It was much more anonymous. This led to swift changes in dynamics, individuals stating opinions, quickly rowing back, aggressively doubling down. And we saw quick changes between personal and group identity salience, raw disclosure followed by cover-ups, rowing back, extreme views. But what does this mean for qualitative research and using different methodologies? How can we ensure we're maximising the potential of each approach? Well, we feel firstly that the idea of independence versus consensus is a really important one to consider. On video platforms, people seem less impacted by the opinion of others. They're more likely to monologue. They feel more rooted in their individual identity. They're in their home setting. This doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can allow for a much more hyper-individual response, unhampered by the desire to please others, to form consensus. Meanwhile, in a face-to-face setting, that's great for finding consensus. Participants are more open to playing with ideas, challenging each other. That's really perfect for more creative and future-focused objectives. Secondly, we need to think about stimulus and what the role of stimulus here. Is it to energize or is it to ideate? So online is great for including hard-to-reach audiences, extending geographical spread, but regardless of the demographic or audience type, open conversation can fall really flat really quickly online. So stimulus is needed to energize people. And in behavioral and attitudinal research, this may be as simple as prompting them with, this is things that people have said about X topic, how do you feel about this? But it's equally important when it comes to activities, projectives, enabling techniques. They require more time, more planning, and more explicit structures online. In a face-to-face setting, it's more fluid, the conversation flows more easily, discussion becomes more iterative. Stimulus is more there to elevate the conversation, to promote ideation rather than energize the conversation. And then, so with all of that in mind, really the facilitator's skills are a lot more different online versus face-to-face. Online is more flexible than face-to-face. The researcher can obviously, as we all know, fit in more sessions within a shorter fieldwork period. However, because individual identity is salient here and people are willing to just kind of throw their thoughts out there, as a moderator, you really have to lean in to create cohesion, create a discussion flow, encourage people to actually respond to each other rather than just monologue. And all this kind of stuff comes much more naturally in a face-to-face setting. And in a face-to-face setting, it's almost more the job of the moderator to kind of lean back, let discussion flow. The participants already want to think iteratively, kind of build a conversational flow. So that's not so much your role there. So from the experiment, we can see there are benefits and drawbacks to all approaches. And ideally, obviously, you want to use a mix of channels. Now that the majority of people are much more comfortable communicating online, we can move more seamlessly between communication environments, and the combinations of methodologies on a project really becomes endless. Of course, much of the time when you're planning an online, or whether you're planning to use an online or face-to-face method, will depend on practical factors. So cost, geographical spread, timings. But when you do have the flexibility, hopefully these questions can help you think more deeply about the right approach for you. So I'll leave you with these 3 thought starters, and perhaps we can discuss a little bit. Will your participant need to be creative and come up with new ideas? Will it be more beneficial if the participants have a shared social identity, or if they're rooted in their personal identity? And how much personal information do you need the participant to disclose? Thank you.
Oh, Lucy, that was so fantastic. This is my second time of seeing this presentation. So I got to see it live in Lisbon last year. And yeah, it's amazing how so much has actually changed in our environment. So before I dive in with some questions, because I've got a couple, but we'd love anyone else, because I think we'll just stay as a group. But yeah, feel free to pop your camera on. You've got Lucy here who's done this fantastic piece of work. So has anyone got any questions?
I think it's interesting when you think, like, clearly with the group dynamics is really interesting. I'm also, because there's running more and more online forums as well for like, and there's more instead of a one-on-one interview. And I do notice kind of, it'll be interesting to see what you guys think as well, because there seems to be quite a difference in responses in a way, because it's more considered in an online forum versus, you know, because they've got time to think about their answer and give you more detail versus when you're there face to face. And I wonder if you guys have had any conversations around the use of online versus face to face one-on-ones.
Yeah, kind of like asynchronous versus synchronous.
Yeah.
I mean, also, when you say forum, are you talking about sort of that they're allowed to converse without moderation,
No,
or
it's more
like comment on each other?
Not so much. It's more like you put in a bank of questions, and over a few days they will respond to, their shopping behaviors or whatever it might be. And so you get them to respond over a few days versus like over an hour when you're, face to face, or even doing a Zoom one-on-one versus doing an online written forum. I feel like they're kind of, it's slightly different, but not. Interesting to hear like your thoughts and other people and thoughts on how you
yeah, again, I mean, to be honest, we're sort of in the same position as what I expressed in the beginning of the presentation, in terms of with asynchronous methods like that, we are a little bit hesitant about them at the nursery, just because we feel when you leave people to their own devices, they tend to just kind of like not really do very much. And like all this stuff is true about, they're safe in their home setting, there's no pressure on them, they're just rooted in their individual identity. Sometimes I think they're a bit anxious that they haven't understood the question. So we do find with those kind of communities that we do tend to do kind of follow-ups as well. But like, as I'm sure Paul can speak to, when we do communities, we do find it's really important to have lots of like interactive activities and things like that, as opposed to just kind of having a question and they answer it. Like that we need to kind of have an activity, so then at least we have a basis to kind of come back and say, why, like, I see that you've highlighted this with the highlighter tool, or I see that you gave this answer in the poll, like what are you feeling about that? I mean, it depends on manpower as well, I think, because I think that they can almost take more time way more time than you would think, and like more time than groups, a series of groups, because you do have to be quite on top of it. Obviously, like as Paul would say as well, like with the AI and the probes you can do now, I think that that's really interesting, and something that we've kind of been playing around with a bit more. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to hear other people's experience of that, because really at the nursery we are predominantly using kind of groups and kind of synchronous methods like that.
Yeah, I just wanted, I think, Lucy, you mentioned something really interesting there around, the time commitment from the moderator side of thing and from the agency side. And I think what we see, what we notice is a asynchronous platform as well. And what we see is when people come in and start working on their project, and it's the first time they've done something like that, they can get very, very lost or completely sort of mismanage their time to do it. So I just think that I think it just as a lookout, all the tech platforms, ask them their advice, and a lot of the tech platforms are coming from a research perspective anyway, and I think that's one sort of touch point that sometimes you kind of use the tech platforms as a supplier, which is fine, but asking those kind of questions about how to moderate, which might not feel like a tech platform question apart from the function, you know, the actual process of doing it, but actually they'll have loads to share on that side of things. And I think for people new to some of the approaches, it's really sensible to kind of get that perspective in. And sometimes people just don't do it because they don't think to do it. So yeah, I think it could be helpful there for new users.
And I'm conscious of time, but one very quick one, 'cause this is just so. Lucy, have now we've got AI qualitative chatbots, and where it's an AI trained moderator talking possibly to another AI virtual persona, or could be a human. But have you started playing with that, and what are your thoughts around that? A whole new world.
Yeah, we've discussed and kind of looked at it. At the moment, I think we're sort of clinging on to the importance of kind of real people, but I don't know if we're sticking our head in the sand a little bit on that. I mean, with AI at the nursery, I think we've been more looking at things like the smart probe in quantitative, and as well using it on communities to kind of make sure that people aren't just giving kind of monosyllabic answers. But yeah, we haven't tried out anything with synthetic participants or anything like that. I know it's like a big conference topic at the moment as well, so it'll be interesting to hear from other people how it's been going. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else has direct experience of that.
No, we're going to start trialing a blend. So kind of just more to your point, it's more an experiment, like test, learn, compare. Yeah, because I think it's still a whole new world for us all. So well, look, thank you so much, Lucy. And I'm going to do a quick little QRCA, but also hand over to Dave, who's going to talk about the worldwide conference next year. But yeah, QRCA, it's presentations like this, fantastic to have Lucy here again, who presented at the QRCA conference last year. But it's a fantastic global community of qualitative researchers all about qual. And yeah, I've been a member for 3 years now. And yeah, you realize when you're a qualie at heart, you can kind of go down these amazing rabbit holes, and you realize we all have so much in common. So, and there's online training, webinars, there's even a monthly paper magazine that gets sent out to you. So, it covers all bases. But yeah, so if you're interested, feel free to ping myself or Dave, or you just go onto the QRCA website and find out more. So Dave, I will hand over to you to do a little, go worldwide.
Yeah, just to add to that, actually, both myself and Nikki are relatively new to QRCA, about 3 years of kind of getting involved, but we've really enjoyed it, and it's a really nice group of people. And probably I would say the conference which I kind of get the most fun out of on a personal level. It's a really nice group, and smart people. So on that note, it leads me nicely to, we've got a conference happening. The worldwide conferences happen once every 2 years. And the next one is going to be in Berlin in May 2025 on the 14th, 15th, and 16th. And just send a link in the chat. So if you want to check that out, it'd be great to see you there. Also, other big thing to mention is that we've got the kind of the call for papers happening. So I think you have a month and 1 day if you want to submit to speak at the conference, either as a keynote speaker, or as leading one of the kind of other sessions, or we've also got something called poster sessions where you can essentially get a smaller group, kind of like an academic thing or background to it, where you present off a poster, which could be a case study of a project or something else. The theme is around creativity and qualitative, so ways that you have done things somewhat differently, whether that's worked or not. We're looking at creativity and qual. So please, if you think that's interesting to you as well, submit for that, have a read. The link is in the chat as well. And if you wanted to, just drop me a line. I can happily chat, jump on a call, or share more info. But would be amazing to, eat sausages and walk through the streets of Berlin, you know, trying to get into nightclubs after the session, you know, getting turned away from the cool places. That's what I'm all about.
Well,
but again,
yeah, do you get a free ticket? Do you get a free ticket if you're chosen as a speaker, or a discount?
yeah, the good question. So the keynotes get free tickets, and the other speakers also get a cut price ticket. But there's all the info on the link I sent through.
Fantastic. Oh, and yeah, as I said, I spoke last year, and Lucy spoke as well at Lisbon. So it's just a great opportunity to, yeah, kind of meet people from literally, I mean, there was probably about 20 or 15 to 20 countries there represented last year. So yeah, it was amazing. Look, thank you again. Oh, sorry, Dave, you were going to say? No.
Nothing. Yeah, it's a good
Nothing.
group.
Great. Okay, you're good. Done. Thank you again, Lucy, so much. And yeah, we've recorded because I know some people couldn't make it, and they're really keen to see this recording. And it'll go on the QRCA website. So, but yeah, really, really appreciate your time this morning. And for those dialing in from the bottom of the world, late at night, thank you. And from the middle of the world, and you know, everywhere else. But yeah, we'll be in touch with next month's speaker. And yeah, great to have you all along, and enjoy your morning, afternoon, and night.